The fluorescent lights of the hotel service corridor hummed, a relentless buzz that mirrored the exhaustion thrumming in Emma Reed's temples. Her shoulders ached, a familiar protest from a double shift spent pushing heavy carts and scrubbing away the fleeting indulgences of Las Vegas's elite. The crisp white of her maid's uniform felt less like a uniform and more like a second skin, clinging to her tired frame. She balanced a stack of freshly laundered towels precariously under one arm, while the other clutched a worn textbook on business ethics, its pages curling from countless late-night study sessions. At 22, Emma often felt 100. Since her parents' deaths, the weight of her younger siblings, the mountain of bills, and the endless pursuit of a college degree had settled on her like a permanent shroud. Every dollar earned, every minute studied, was a deliberate act of survival. Sometimes, usually in the quiet moments between midnight and dawn, a desperate, childish wish would surface. Just one night, one single, irresponsible night where she wasn't the adult, where someone else carried the burden, where she could simply exist without consequence. It was a foolish fantasy, quickly dismissed, but it hovered on the edges of her weariness. "Reed, VIP Suite 3411, urgent!" Her manager's harried voice sliced through the corridor, making Emma flinch. "Spilled champagne, broken glass, the works. Get up there, stat. The guest is particular." The last word was spat out with a grimace, suggesting a level of entitlement Emma was all too familiar with. She nodded, adjusting her grip on the towels and textbook, already mentally calculating how this last-minute crisis would delay her precious study time. Suite 34111, a penthouse reserved for the highest rollers, probably meant a mess of epic proportions. As she hurried towards the elevators, her hand instinctively went to her belt loop where her master keycard usually hung. Panic flared in her chest. It wasn't there. "No, no, no," she muttered, fumbling through her apron pockets, her eyes darting to the floor. Losing a keycard was a serious offense, especially a master. The manager's already frayed nerves would snap. She retraced her steps, her gaze sweeping the pristine carpet, but the small plastic rectangle was nowhere to be found. The urgent call for 3411 echoed in her mind, pressing down on her. Just as a wave of despair threatened to overwhelm her, a sudden shift in the air, a drop in temperature, made her look up. A figure emerged from a private elevator bank, flanked by two men in dark suits who moved with an almost predatory grace. It was him, the mysterious guest who had checked into the most exclusive penthouse suite just days ago. Isaac Knight. He was taller than any man she had ever seen, his presence so commanding it felt like a physical force. His tailored suit seemed to meld with his broad shoulders, emphasizing an undeniable power that radiated from him. He walked with a silent, deliberate stride, his dark eyes like chips of polished obsidian. As he passed her, his gaze, cold and utterly devoid of warmth, flickered over her for the briefest instant. It wasn't a stare, not even a prolonged look, but a mere acknowledging sweep of his vision. Yet it was enough. Emma felt a strange jolt, a sudden awareness of her own smallness, her crumpled uniform, her frantic, desperate search. He was untouchable, a king in his own glittering domain, and she was merely a shadow in the service corridor, a part of the background machinery. The sheer, unadulterated power he exuded was almost suffocating, an oppressive weight that somehow, paradoxically, made her chaotic world feel momentarily still. Then, as quickly as he appeared, he was gone, disappearing around the corner, his presence leaving a strange, lingering chill in the air. She was left alone again, the hum of the lights returning to her awareness, the missing keycard still a source of quiet dread. The weight of her world, momentarily overshadowed by his imposing presence, settled back onto her shoulders, heavier than before. The last towel was folded, the final surface polished to a gleaming sheen. Emma dragged her cart down the service elevator, the silence a welcome balm after the frantic rush of Suite 3411. She had found her master keycard wedged between the pages of her business ethics textbook, a testament to her utter exhaustion and scattered mind. Her manager had merely sighed, too weary to be truly angry. Now the shift was finally over, but the day's burden still clung to her like a damp uniform. The thought of going home to face another evening of homework and sibling supervision felt like scaling a mountain. That fleeting, foolish wish from earlier, the one about one irresponsible night, pulsed harder now. It wasn't just a wish, it was a desperate ache. Emma found herself standing outside the hotel's dimly lit upscale bar, the soft murmur of conversation and clinking glasses, a siren call. This was not her world. She bought her clothes from discount racks, not designer boutiques. But tonight, the pull was undeniable. With a hesitant breath, she pushed open the heavy door. She chose a discreet stool at the far end of the bar, ordering the cheapest wine, feeling utterly out of place in her rumpled uniform and tired shoes. The clinking ice, the low hum of voices, the muted sparkle of the strip lights outside the panoramic windows, it was a temporary anesthesia. She just wanted to be invisible, to forget for a few hours. Then a shadow fell over her, not a literal shadow, but a shift in the atmosphere, a sudden drop in the temperature of the room. Emma felt it before she saw him. Isaac Knight. He moved with the quiet power of a predator, his dark suit impeccable, his presence consuming the air around them. He stopped beside her, not too close, but close enough for her to feel the immense gravitational pull of him. "A long day, Miss Reed?" His voice was a low rumble, rich and dangerous, sending a shiver down her spine. It wasn't a question, but a statement, an observation that startled her. How did he know her name? A flicker of fear, mixed with a strange, dizzying fascination, made her heart pound. She hadn't realized he had seen her earlier, that he had even registered her existence. She turned to him, her simple glass of wine feeling utterly inadequate in the face of his formidable presence. His dark eyes, like polished obsidian, held hers, unwavering, intense. They seemed to strip away her defenses, seeing past the tired Maid uniform to the raw vulnerability beneath. Clara felt exposed, yet oddly, thrillingly seen. "Yes, sir," she managed, her voice barely a whisper. He didn't smile. His expression remained unreadable, but the intensity in his gaze deepened. "Perhaps you could use a distraction." Again, not a question. It was a command, an invitation, a declaration. His hand, large and powerful, settled on the small of her back, a possessive gesture that both startled and calmed her. It was a fleeting touch, yet it felt like a brand, claiming her in that instant. Emma felt herself being swept away, a willing participant in a dream she hadn't dared to imagine. He didn't ask, he simply led. His dominance was absolute, a silent, unyielding force that she found herself yielding to without resistance. For the first time in years, she wasn't carrying the weight of the world. She was simply carried. His presence was a fortress, his quiet command a balm to her chaotic soul. The night was a blur of intoxicating power and raw, unadulterated desire. She felt protected, utterly safe, free from her burdens for a few precious hours. She was completely receptive to his every unspoken demand, a willing canvas for his intensity. She woke alone. The luxurious suite was vast and silent, the city lights a distant shimmering glow outside the panoramic windows. A sense of shame washed over her, a cold wave of regret. What had she done? This wasn't her. This reckless, irresponsible act was a betrayal of everything she had worked for. But beneath the shame, a lingering thrill pulsed, a memory of absolute surrender, of feeling utterly consumed and protected. Emma slipped out of the bed, her movements quick and quiet. She gathered her clothes, her uniform, feeling a desperate need to escape, to erase the memory of her fleeting recklessness. He was a billionaire, a titan of industry. She was a maid. She was nothing more than a forgettable fling, a momentary indulgence for a man like him. She left, believing she was leaving behind only a ghost. But as she disappeared down the corridor, a red light blinked silently from a hidden camera in the suite. Isaac Knight watched her go, his expression still unreadable, but a dangerous possessiveness already taking root in the depths of his cold, dark eyes. The harsh fluorescent lights of the service corridor were Emma's only constant. She was back in her uniform, pushing her cart, scrubbing floors and changing linens, each mundane task an anchor in a world that had felt dangerously adrift just a day ago. The memory of the night in Isaac Knight's suite was a burning ember in her mind, a secret she desperately tried to bury under layers of routine and exhaustion. It had been a mistake, a moment of weakness, a desperate grab for a freedom she couldn't afford. She was Emma Reed, the responsible one, the maid, the student, the sister, not the woman who had yielded so completely to a stranger's intoxicating power. She worked harder, trying to outrun the shame, the lingering thrill, the phantom touch of his large hand on her back. Every time she rounded a corner, she half expected to see him, that imposing figure, but he was gone, just as she had expected. He was a billionaire. She was a maid. Their worlds were not meant to collide beyond that single, reckless night. Then the announcement came. It rippled through the hotel like an electric current, stopping conversations, freezing smiles. The hotel had been sold. It had a new owner. The general manager, his face pale and strained, gathered the staff in the main ballroom, his voice cracking as he delivered the news. "Effective immediately," he declared, his gaze sweeping over the silent employees. "The new owner of the Bellagio is Mr. Isaac Knight." Emma's blood ran cold. The air left her lungs in a silent gasp. The room spun. Isaac Knight, her new boss, the man whose touch still ghosted on her skin, whose voice still rumbled in her memory. He wasn't just a guest. He owned everything. He owned her workplace. The walls of her carefully constructed anonymity crumbled around her. A sudden, dizzying wave of nausea washed over her, making her grip the armrest of a nearby chair. She swallowed hard, dismissing it as shock, sheer, unadulterated panic. Over the next few days, a subtle unease began to settle in her body. The early morning nausea wasn't a one-off. She felt perpetually exhausted, a bone-deep weariness that even 8 hours of sleep couldn't touch. Her appetite wavered, replaced by strange cravings and a heightened sensitivity to certain smells. It had to be stress, she reasoned, the monumental stress of Isaac Knight now owning her entire existence, coupled with her already overwhelming schedule. She couldn't afford to be sick. Then came the day of his grand tour. The entire hotel held its breath. Isaac Knight moved through the glittering lobbies and meticulously kept corridors like a silent, powerful storm. He was flanked by his security detail, his presence radiating an authority so absolute it bent the very air around him. Employees straightened their uniforms, averted their eyes, and spoke in hushed whispers. Emma, attempting to blend into the background near a display of fresh flowers, felt her heart hammer against her ribs. She kept her head down, hoping, praying, that he wouldn't see her, wouldn't remember. But she felt it when he approached. That familiar drop in temperature, the oppressive weight of his presence. His footsteps were deliberate, unhurried, echoing ominously on the polished marble floors. He paused near her, speaking to her supervisor in a low, dangerous tone, his questions sharp, his observations precise. Emma felt pinned, a small insect under a magnifying glass. She kept her gaze fixed on the tips of her worn work shoes, willing herself to be invisible. And this one? His voice. It was a low rumble, rich and dangerous, sending a shiver directly through her. It was the same voice that had commanded her attention, her surrender that reckless night. She felt his dark eyes on her, a physical weight. It wasn't a casual glance. It was a lingering, possessive sweep, a deep acknowledgement that sent warmth and dread through her veins in equal measure. He saw her. He remembered. Emma felt her cheeks flush, her hands trembling slightly. She didn't dare look up. Her supervisor stammered a quick, nervous introduction. Isaac Knight said nothing more, but the intensity of his gaze remained, a silent, powerful claim. He exuded an air of absolute authority, instilling fear and respect in equal measure in everyone around him. He moved on, leaving Emma trembling, her carefully constructed wall of forgetfulness shattered. He was overtly observing her, and the knowledge settled deep in her bones, a terrifying, thrilling certainty. The summons arrived in the form of a crisp, embossed card delivered by a new, stone-faced security guard. Emma's name, written in elegant script, stood out starkly against the stark white. Isaac Knight wanted to see her, now. Her stomach clenched, a cold knot of dread tightening with every step she took towards the executive elevators. This was it, the moment she had been dreading since the announcement. He remembered. He was going to fire her. The reckless night, her foolish surrender, was about to cost her everything. The elevator ascended in hushed silence, the plush carpet muffling her frantic heartbeats. When the doors opened, she stepped into a world so far removed from her own. It felt like a different dimension. Isaac Knight's new office suite spanned the entire top floor. A breathtaking expanse of polished marble, dark wood, and floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a dizzying panorama of the glittering strip. It wasn't an office. It was a fortress, a declaration of power. He stood by the windows, his back to her, a dark, imposing silhouette against the bright desert sky. His presence filled the vast space, making her feel impossibly small, an intruder in his domain. The air crackled with an unspoken command, a silent expectation that she knew she would somehow be incapable of meeting. "Miss Reed." His voice was a low, resonant hum that vibrated through the floor and up into her bones. He didn't turn. "Your file indicates a strong work ethic, a keen intellect, and an unusual resilience." Emma swallowed, her throat suddenly dry. This wasn't how she expected to be fired. She braced herself for the inevitable dismissal, the polite but firm rejection. Then he turned, his dark eyes like chips of obsidian, fixing on her. There was no warmth, no discernible emotion, only an intense, unwavering focus. "You are no longer a hotel maid, Miss Reed. Effective immediately, you are my private assistant." It wasn't a question. It wasn't even a request. It was a command, delivered with such absolute certainty that the air left Emma's lungs. Her mind reeled. Private assistant. Her. The words were a dizzying, terrifying cascade. She wanted to protest, to explain that she knew nothing about being a private assistant to a billionaire, that she had college and her siblings, that she was just Emma. But the words caught in her throat. His gaze, his sheer presence, left no room for refusal. It was simply a fact, a new, undeniable reality. Overwhelmed, she could only manage a choked, "Sir?" "Your duties will be explained by my head of staff," he continued, his voice leaving no room for discussion. "You will be by my side. You will learn my world, and you will adapt." And adapt she did. Suddenly, Emma was plunged into Isaac Knight's ruthless business empire, a world of high-stakes deals, impenetrable security, and absolute control. She was constantly by his side, a silent shadow in his wake, observing his every move. She saw the cold efficiency with which he handled his rivals, the unwavering authority with which he commanded his staff, the vast network of power that bent to his will. His world was demanding, relentless, but also, surprisingly, incredibly ordered. Her own life, by contrast, had always been a chaotic scramble, a desperate fight against the odds. There was a strange, almost magnetic pull to the sheer security and predictable efficiency his world offered, a stark contrast to the constant uncertainty she had always known. But even as she navigated this new, bewildering reality, the subtle changes in her body grew undeniable. The morning nausea became a daily ritual, often accompanied by dizzy spells that forced her to lean against walls when she thought no one was looking. Her small, secret cravings intensified, and she found herself feeling utterly exhausted even after a full night's sleep. It wasn't stress. It couldn't be. One morning, after a particularly brutal wave of nausea that left her weak and trembling, Emma knew she couldn't ignore it any longer. On her lunch break, she slipped out to a drugstore, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Back in the quiet solitude of the employee washroom, her hands shaking, she took the test. The 2 pink lines stared back at her, stark and undeniable. Positive. A cold wave of despair washed over her, heavier than any fatigue, more profound than any fear of Isaac Knight. Her worst fears had materialized. She was pregnant, with his child. The weight of supporting her siblings, the crushing burden of her responsibilities, now felt utterly insurmountable. How could she possibly manage this? How could she protect this tiny, vulnerable life when she could barely keep her own head above water? Tears pricked her eyes, but she quickly blinked them back. She couldn't afford to break down, not here, not now. With trembling fingers, she folded the positive pregnancy test into a tiny, desperate square. She couldn't keep it, couldn't let anyone see it. Slipping out of the washroom, she made her way to the service corridor, her mind a frantic scramble. She found her old housekeeping cart, still occasionally used for odd jobs, tucked away in an unused alcove. With a furtive glance around, Emma quickly tucked the folded test deep within a forgotten pocket of her old uniform apron, hidden among a spare cleaning cloth and a half-used bottle of disinfectant. Her secret, her impossible burden, was now truly buried, unseen, in the very heart of the world she was trying so desperately to escape. Emma found herself caught in a whirlwind. Isaac Knight's world moved at a terrifying pace, a relentless current of meetings, calls, and urgent directives that left her head spinning. Her new office, while opulent and meticulously organized, felt less like a sanctuary and more like a battle station. She sat at a sleek, custom-built desk, surrounded by technology she barely understood, struggling to keep up with his exacting expectations. He set the rules for her time, her appearance, her duties, not with a gentle hand, but with the unyielding force of a natural law. Every instruction was a command, every glance a silent demand for absolute precision. Initially, she chafed under his absolute control. Her entire life had been about making her own frantic decisions, juggling countless responsibilities. Now, every aspect of her workday, and often her evenings, was dictated by his schedule, his preferences, his very whim. Yet, beneath the initial resistance, a strange realization began to dawn. The predictable rhythm, the clear boundaries, the sheer, undeniable order he imposed began to soothe a part of her she hadn't realized was so frayed. The chaos that had once defined her existence was replaced by a rigid, unyielding structure, and in that structure she found a hesitant, almost shameful sense of relief. Her secret, however, continued its quiet, relentless march. The morning sickness persisted, a dull throb of nausea that she learned to suppress with practiced ease, always keeping a small packet of crackers hidden in her desk drawer. Her fatigue deepened, a constant companion that made her eyes heavy and her thoughts sluggish. And then, one afternoon, as she sat quietly reviewing documents, a new, faint flutter in her lower belly, barely perceptible, made her breath hitch. It was a tiny, ethereal tremor, a secret message from the life growing within her, a truth she clasped even closer to her heart. Isaac, though outwardly as cold and unreadable as ever, possessed an unnerving awareness. He never spoke of her fatigue, never acknowledged the slight paleness that sometimes clung to her features. But Emma began to notice subtle shifts. Her desk chair, initially a standard executive model, not question. You will not deviate. You will stay precisely where I tell you, when I tell you, and you will trust me implicitly. It wasn't a request, but a command, delivered with such absolute certainty that Emma felt a strange, profound peace settle over her. There was no room for argument, no space for doubt. His words were a lifeline, a promise that he held all the threads, that he would guide her through this storm. Her instincts, honed by weeks of submission to his authority, told her to obey, to yield completely. Her body, heavy with the growing life within her, made the decision even easier. Her only responsibility was to her child, and Isaac was the only one capable of ensuring their safety. She met his gaze, a silent vow passing between them. She wasn't a fighter, not in his world of shadows and power. Her strength lay elsewhere, in her quiet resilience, in her unwavering belief in him. She would be his calm in the storm, his anchor. Her soft presence, her complete trust, was what she could offer, a beacon for his resolve. He moved from the desk then, walking towards her, his footsteps deliberate, heavy. He stopped directly in front of her, his imposing height towering over her, making her feel small, protected. His large hand reached out, not to touch, but to hover just above her swelling belly, a gesture of fierce possessiveness, yet imbued with a surprising tenderness. His dark eyes softened, just for a moment, a flicker of something raw and vulnerable in their depths, before hardening again with unwavering resolve. "You are safe, Emma," he said, his voice a low, gravelly promise that resonated deep within her. It wasn't a soft reassurance, but a declaration, a statement of fact backed by the steel in his eyes, by the terrifying power she knew he wielded. "I will ensure it." Emma didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her heart, once so frantic and unsure, was now steady, filled with a quiet, fierce devotion. She simply nodded, a small, silent vow, her gaze unwavering, her trust absolute. She was his, utterly and completely, and in his formidable, dangerous grip, she knew with every fiber of her being that she was precisely where she belonged. Safe. The air in the loading dock was a cacophony of industrial sounds, the relentless rumble of heavy trucks, the clatter of trolleys, the guttural roar of forklifts. It was a world away from the hushed opulence of the villa, a place of grit and grime, exhaust fumes, and the metallic tang of machinery. Emma, her heart a frantic bird fluttering in her chest, shivered despite the stifling heat. She was dressed in simple, practical clothes, her pregnancy now undeniable, a gentle curve beneath her shirt that made her feel exposed, fragile. She knew with a chilling certainty that this was Isaac's plan. This was the calculated vulnerability he had spoken of. She was the bait. Isaac walked beside her, his presence a dark, unyielding anchor in the chaos. He didn't hold her hand, didn't offer comforting words. His gaze was sharp, constantly sweeping their surroundings, missing nothing. His private security detail was present, a silent, almost invisible perimeter around them. But Emma felt an unnerving sense of exposure. They were in a blind spot, a chink in the hotel's otherwise impenetrable armor, chosen precisely for its chaos and fleeting anonymity. She trusted Isaac implicitly, had given him her absolute devotion, but the fear for her child, for the fragile life within her, was a cold knot in her stomach. She followed his lead, her movements precise, her eyes darting nervously. The noise was overwhelming, a deliberate cover. Forklifts whizzed past, their warning beeps adding to the din. Men in uniform shouted orders. It was a perfect storm of distraction, a deliberate stage set for the final confrontation. Emma felt a primal instinct to shield her belly, to make herself smaller, but Isaac's unspoken command was clear. She was to appear normal, to draw them out. Then, just as they rounded a stack of empty crates, a sudden, horrifying shift in the atmosphere. The cacophony of the loading dock seemed to dim, replaced by a sudden, sickening silence in her own ears. Two figures, hulking and menacing, materialized from the shadows of a parked delivery van. Their faces were obscured by dark hoods, their movements swift, predatory. Emma's blood ran cold. This was it. "There she is, get her!" A gruff voice barked, cutting through the background noise. Before Emma could even register the words, two more figures emerged, surrounding her, their hands reaching out. They were rough, callous, grabbing her arms with a brutal efficiency that shocked the air from her lungs. A scream tore from her throat, raw and desperate, a sound she barely recognized as her own. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a terrifying drumbeat of pure panic. They were pulling her, dragging her towards the open door of the waiting van, its interior a dark, gaping maw. "No! My baby!" she cried out, her voice hoarse, fighting against their brutal grip. She struggled, twisting, kicking, but their strength was overwhelming. One of them clamped a hand over her mouth, muffling her cries, his fingers digging painfully into her cheek. The metallic smell of the loading dock, mixed with the sweat and fear, filled her senses. She could see the dark interior of the van, feel the pull towards an unknown, terrifying fate. Her baby. They were taking her baby. Just as she was about to be hoisted into the van, just as the last vestiges of hope threatened to abandon her, a sudden blinding flash of light exploded in the shadows. A sharp, deafening crack echoed through the loading dock, momentarily silencing the din. Then a figure appeared, as if from the very heart of the shadows, a storm of vengeance in human form. Isaac. He moved with a speed that defied his imposing size, a dark, terrifying force of nature. He was no longer just a man, he was a primal protector, his eyes, like chips of polished obsidian, locked onto the men who dared to touch what was his. His presence alone was a weapon, radiating a cold, unadulterated fury that made the very air vibrate. He was here. He had come for her. Isaac moved with the terrifying speed of a predator, a dark blur of raw power and unadulterated fury. He didn't hesitate, didn't speak a single word, but the roar of his presence was deafening in Emma's ears. The man gripping her arm, the one whose hand had clamped over her mouth, barely had time to register the new threat before Isaac was on him. A large, iron-hard fist connected with the enforcer's jaw with a sickening, wet crack that echoed even over the din of the loading dock. The man's eyes rolled back and he crumpled to the concrete floor, a lifeless heap. The sudden, brutal efficiency of it made Emma gasp, her own muted cry escaping as the hand was ripped from her mouth. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic, terrified bird. She felt the immediate release, the shock of freedom, even as the chaos intensified around her. Isaac didn't pause. He spun, his dark eyes like chips of obsidian, already locked onto the second man who still held her, pulling her towards the van. Before the enforcer could react, Isaac's powerful arms snaked out, grabbing the man's head in a vice-like grip. With a savage, almost primal grunt, Isaac slammed the man's head against the cold, unyielding concrete wall of the loading dock. Once, twice. The dull, sickening thuds resonated deep within Emma's bones, a visceral, terrifying sound that spoke of broken bone and shattered will. The man went limp, sliding down the wall to join his unconscious partner on the ground. Emma, released, stumbled back, her legs weak beneath her, her hands flying to her belly. The sheer, terrifying brutality of Isaac's actions, the raw, unleashed power, left her breathless, frozen in a mix of horror and an overwhelming, dizzying awe. He was a force of nature, utterly merciless when provoked, a dangerous, beautiful storm of protection. Just as the remaining two enforcers, stunned by the sudden, brutal turn of events, lunged forward, Isaac moved again. He pulled a compact weapon from his inner jacket, the glint of metal stark against the dim light. He didn't aim to kill, not yet, but the sharp crack of two warning shots reverberated through the loading dock, slicing through the industrial noise like thunder. The bullets embedded themselves in the concrete wall above the men's heads, sending a shower of dust and debris raining down. It was a clear, chilling declaration of absolute dominance, a promise of what would come if they dared to challenge him further. Almost instantly, Isaac's private security detail, a surge of dark-suited men, swarmed the loading dock. They moved with terrifying precision, disarming the remaining enforcers, subduing them with swift, practiced movements. The fight was over in seconds, a brutal, efficient ballet of power. Through it all, Isaac had remained a solid, unwavering wall between Emma and the lingering threat. Even as his security team handled the aftermath, his gaze, sharp and predatory, never left her. He was still radiating a dangerous intensity, his chest heaving slightly, but his focus was entirely on her safety. He turned, holstering his weapon with a smooth, deliberate motion, and took a single, purposeful step towards her. His large hands reached out, not to grab, but to cradle her face, his thumbs gently brushing away the tears she hadn't realized were streaming down her cheeks. "Emma," he murmured, his voice a low growl, rough with a residual fury that still simmered, yet softened for her. He scanned her face, his eyes searching for any sign of harm, his fierce possessiveness a palpable force. "Are you hurt?" Emma, trembling, could only shake her head, her breath catching in her throat. She leaned into his touch, her body still shaking with adrenaline, but an overwhelming, profound sense of safety washing over her. He was here. He had saved her. He had shielded her with his own body, had fought with a ferocity that defied description. The distant wail of sirens grew louder, closer. Soon, official vehicles, police cruisers and ambulances began to pull into the loading dock, their flashing lights casting an eerie, pulsating glow over the scene. Uniformed officers quickly secured the area, their faces grim as they surveyed the unconscious men and Isaac's formidable security detail. A senior officer, a woman with a stern but compassionate face, approached Emma, her gaze softening as she took in Emma's shaking frame and visibly pregnant state. She spoke softly, her voice an offer of escape. "Miss Reed, we can get you out of here. We can offer you protective custody, a new identity, a chance to be truly safe, away from all of this." She gestured vaguely towards Isaac, towards the chaos, towards the remnants of the violence. It was a lifeline, a chance to disappear, to leave Isaac Knight and his dangerous world behind forever. Emma looked at the officer, then back at Isaac. He stood tall and imposing, his presence a fortress, his dark eyes still fixed on her, unwavering, demanding. She saw the raw power in him, the controlled ferocity, the absolute certainty of his protection. She saw the man who had just personally beaten men unconscious, fired warning shots and shielded her with his body. She saw the father of her child, the man who would kill for her, who had claimed her, who had brought her into his golden cage and kept her safe within it. The idea of leaving him, of stepping back into a world where she was alone and vulnerable, felt utterly impossible, a betrayal of the safety she now craved above all else. She took a deep, steadying breath, the trembling in her body beginning to subside, replaced by a fierce, unyielding resolve. She looked past the officer, past the flashing lights, past the chaos, and met Isaac's gaze, her eyes clear, unwavering. Her voice, though still a little shaky, was strong, resolute, cutting through the din. "No," she declared, her voice firm, leaving no room for doubt. "I'm staying." She reached out, her hand finding Isaac's, intertwining her fingers with his, holding on with absolute certainty. She looked directly into his dark, fathomless eyes, her devotion absolute, her choice final. I'm staying as Mrs. Knight. The chaos of the loading dock, the terrifying rush of adrenaline, and the chilling display of Isaac's fury had faded into a memory, a stark reminder of the world he inhabited. Emma, though still feeling a tremor deep within her whenever she recalled the events, found herself enveloped in a profound, unyielding sense of safety within the villa's walls. The aftermath had been swift and absolute. Isaac, true to his word, had orchestrated the complete elimination of the rival syndicate. Emma never witnessed the details, never asked. She simply felt the shift in the atmosphere, the gradual easing of the ever-present tension. The hushed reports from Isaac's security team grew less frequent. The grim lines around his mouth softened, imperceptibly, but enough for her to notice. The media, after a brief flurry of speculation about Isaac Knight's engagement and a mysterious incident at his hotel, had quickly moved on, leaving them in a new, settled quiet. Emma was safe. The knowledge settled deep in her bones, a warmth that countered the lingering chill of fear. She spent her days in the sprawling luxury of the villa, her every need anticipated, her every comfort attended to. The guards were still there, silent and watchful, but their presence no longer felt like surveillance. Instead, they were part of the impenetrable shell Isaac had built around her, a constant, reassuring hum of protection. She was recovering, not just from the physical shock, but from the emotional turmoil of her old life. The relentless bills, the exhausting shifts, the constant worry for her siblings, all of it had vanished, replaced by an ordered, opulent existence. She no longer struggled with the opulent confinement. The gilded cage, once a symbol of her lost freedom, had transformed into her haven, her sanctuary. Every room, every manicured garden path felt like an extension of Isaac's protective embrace. The ring on her finger, once a heavy, startling symbol of ownership, now felt like a natural part of her, a beautiful, undeniable mark of her belonging. She was Mrs. Knight, a title that carried an immense weight of power and protection, a title she had chosen fiercely and irrevocably. Her bond with Isaac deepened, not through grand declarations or passionate pronouncements, but through the quiet rhythm of their days. He was still Isaac, formidable and demanding, his presence a constant, unyielding force. But now his protectiveness was no longer just a reaction to an external threat. It was a fundamental part of his being, woven into the very fabric of their shared life. He watched over her with an intensity that never wavered, ensuring her every whim was met, her every comfort guaranteed. His gaze, usually cold and unreadable, would soften, almost imperceptibly when it fell upon her, and especially when it drifted to her visibly swelling belly. It was a private warmth, a silent acknowledgement of the precious life she carried, and the unwavering devotion he held for both of them. Emma found herself instinctively reaching for his hand during quiet moments, a soft, almost unconscious gesture of connection and trust. Sometimes, during a walk through the villa gardens or a silent meal in the vast dining room, her fingers would brush against his, and he would simply turn his large hand, his fingers intertwining with hers. A silent, powerful claim. There was an unspoken language between them now, a profound understanding that transcended words. She didn't question his authority, she embraced it. She didn't chafe under his control, she found peace in it. The power dynamic had settled, shifting from an immediate reactive dominance to an inherent, settled control, with her willing, absolute submission. She was safe, cherished, and utterly, irrevocably his, held within the formidable strength of his protection. Months later, the desert sun, a blazing, relentless eye, beat down upon the sprawling estate just beyond the glittering chaos of the Strip. Inside, however, Emma moved through a world of hushed calm and opulent comfort. Her body, full and heavy with the promise of new life, now waddled with a graceful slowness through the private maternity suite that Isaac had built exclusively for her. It wasn't a room, but an entire wing, a sanctuary of soft light, muted colors, and state-of-the-art medical equipment, all unseen behind discreet, paneled walls. Every detail, from the crisp Egyptian cotton sheets to the gentle lull of a white noise machine, was designed for her absolute peace. She ran a hand over the smooth, cool surface of a marble counter, a soft smile gracing her lips. Outside, Isaac Knight still commanded his empire, his name whispered with a mixture of fear and reverence, striking terror into the hearts of gamblers and businessmen alike with his cold, unyielding power. His world spun on, dangerous and demanding, but here, within these walls, she was untouchable. She was safe. The arrival of their child was a moment Emma would forever hold close. A profound, beautiful punctuation mark on their journey. It had been a blur of fierce, quiet pain, and then suddenly a tiny, perfect cry. Isaac had been there, a silent, unyielding presence, his large hand a constant anchor, his dark eyes fixed solely on her. When their son, a miniature miracle of soft skin and dark, searching eyes, had been placed in her arms, Emma felt a love so vast it threatened to consume her. From that moment, her cherished position in Isaac's world solidified, became absolute. She was doted upon, her every whim anticipated, her needs met before she even voiced them. She was perfectly safe, perfectly loved, cocooned in the fierce, protective embrace of a man who owned everything, and now owned her heart. The golden cage had transformed into a haven, a place of profound peace where the dangers of the world could not touch her or their son. One night, the soft glow of the nursery nightlight cast long, dancing shadows on the walls. Emma lay awake, listening to the gentle gurgle of her newborn son in the bespoke crib. Isaac, the cold tycoon who commanded an empire, was pacing the nursery at 3 a.m., a vision that still made Emma's heart swell with an almost unbearable tenderness. He was bare-chested, the raw power of his body evident in the dim light, a concealed weapon holstered discreetly at his hip. He moved with a silent, watchful grace, a formidable sentinel in the quiet room. He held a bottle, carefully warming it in a small, specialized device, his large fingers surprisingly gentle as he tested the temperature on his wrist. His dark eyes, usually so sharp and unreadable, held a soft, almost vulnerable focus as he looked at their son. The dangerous world he commanded still spun on outside, its demands relentless, its threats ever present. But within the walls of their home, within this room, he was simply Isaac, a devoted protector, her strong, demanding husband, and the father of their heir. Emma watched him from the doorway, a profound contentment filling her. She remembered the reckless maid, the desperate student, the girl who wished for just one night where she wasn't the adult. Now, she was Mrs. Knight, the mother of his child, cherished and protected. She knew, with an absolute certainty that resonated deep in her soul, that she was exactly where she belonged, eternally under his powerful, protective command. Their bond, forged in a night of reckless desire and tested by the shadows of his world, was now an eternal, unbreakable fortress, guarding their perfect, precious life. If you enjoyed this story, tell us where you're watching from and subscribe to Tales of Power and Desire to keep up with our intense romances.